On Logan. So this right here is section 6.2a on parallelograms. So the idea is that you guys just get a real quick overview. If this video takes longer than 5 minutes, then I'm doing too much. So I want to get you guys in, out, and quick as possible, but also make sure that you guys walk away with some pretty heavy understanding. You have an assignment after this, so please take a look at Google Classroom. Just make sure that you understand what's going on. All right, so section 6.2a is on parallelograms. The most important thing you need to know about parallelograms right now is the definition, and it's based on that name right there. So you notice that in the name of parallelograms, you got that word parallel right there. So a parallelogram is when you have two sides that are parallel to each other, and then you have another two pair of sides that are also parallel to each other. Now, because I'm pretty lame at drawing my parallelograms, what I'm going to do is I'm going to include the parallel symbol to show that those two sides are parallel to each other. But remember, it's not just those two sides, it's also the two sides that are looking at each other in the horizontal direction. So we got those two sets of sides being parallel to each other. That right there is the definition of parallelograms. Now, the first property of parallelogram. So there's going to be three properties today. Okay, so three properties: 1, 2, and 3. The first property is that the opposite sides, and I'm going to need you guys to remember this, opposite sides are congruent. Okay, opposite sides are congruent. So if you know that this thing is a parallelogram, then what you can do is you can say, well, I know now that these two sides are congruent to each other. So let's suppose you had 4x minus 19 over here, and then down here, let's say you had 2x minus 3. You could now say that these two sides are congruent to each other, which means you could write the equation 4x minus 19 is congruent to 2. Actually, you know what? Let's not do congruent. We'll do equal since it's an equation. So we'll say that if the sides are congruent, then their measurements must be equal. So we'll say 4x minus 19 is equal to 2x minus 3. And if we need to solve that thing, we can solve that thing. All right, part 2. So the second property, there are three properties. Remember, there are three properties. You got the first one. The second one, property number 2. Okay, property number 2 is going to be that opposite angles. So opposite angles are congruent. Now, these two properties are real simple because they're based on the same principle that if you're opposite, then you're going to be congruent. So you now know that if this angle right here is 70 degrees, then the angle that's opposite to it, right? The angle that's opposite to it must also be congruent. Now, to help us understand which angles I'm talking about specifically, I'm going to go ahead and label this parallelogram as parallelogram ABCD. All right, one more time. I'm going to call this guy parallelogram. Notice my laziness, parallelogram. I write that symbol right there. Parallelogram ABCD. So that tells us that we have a parallelogram. Now, if you have parallelogram ABCD, you got three properties. The first property, opposite sides are congruent. The second property, opposite angles are congruent. So we could say angle A is congruent to angle C. What other angles are congruent? That's right. Take a second. All right. So you could also say that angle B and angle D are congruent to each other. Now, there's one last property. Now, this last property is a little tricky, so I need you guys to be careful, take your time with it. The last property is that the two angles right here, okay, the consecutive interior angles, we're going to call them consecutive angles. So property number 3 is that the consecutive angles are going to add up to 180. Consecutive angles add to 180. Now, if you remember the vocabulary on that thing right there, that means that they are supplementary angles. So if you are consecutive angles, then you're going to say that you are supplementary angles. Okay? So what that tells me is that I now know that angle A, when I add it to angle B, what I'm going to get is 180. So that means that angle B is going to have to be, what you think, give you a second. That's right, angle B's got to be 110, okay? All right, so do me a favor, take a look at the Google Classroom. What you want to do is just show me that you understand these three properties. There's going to be 2 assignments. You get to pick one of the 2. Please take the time. It shouldn't take longer than 15 more minutes. That means 20 minutes total today, all right? Hope you guys are doing well.